If you have been following along with our Unmeasured podcast perfectionism series, welcome back for part three. If you haven't already, I strongly encourage you to listen to part one and part two before this episode. So go back and listen to episode 30 and episode 31, and then jump right back in here with us for today's conversation. Without even realizing it, you have been doing something over the course of part one and part two of this series. And that is that you have been creating, let's call it a user manual of sorts. So during part one and part two of this series, you were identifying the components of your oh no, I'm in a moment of perfectionism. What the heck do I do? And if you are like me, when a light goes on in the car and you are driving, you think, I have no idea what this light means. I need to pull over and pull out that gigantic book that sits in in the front of my car and flip through the pages and look through all the pictures and find out what this flashing light is trying to say to me. Because in a moment where it feels like things are not going right or something might be going wrong, which is what it feels like in a moment of perfectionism, right? We are activated in that moment. In the moment where we feel the pressure to be perfect, we are activated. You can now pull out your very own how the heck do I navigate this moment of perfectionism user manual, your own personalized handbook that you have actually been creating for yourself over part one and part two of this series. So, because, like I just mentioned, when we feel the pressure to be perfect, when we're having a moment where we are stuck in perfectionism, we are activated. It is very valuable to first identify your favorite ways to help to regulate your nervous system. And the first thing that I want you to write down for your user manual is my favorite ways to regulate my nervous system. Your best practices to self regulate in triggering moments. Maybe that is movement. Movement can be very powerful for us in those moments. Maybe that is a walk or dancing or literally shaking. Shaking can be so helpful. Swaying, almost rocking yourself like you would a baby. If you want to join me for an unmeasured bar class, of course, I would love to have you there for one of those. Really thinking about, are there any forms of movement that would be available to me that I'm willing to try to self-regulate in a triggering moment? And you can even think, if you want to, what a go-to song would be for a moment like this, because using our senses is very helpful when we are feeling activated. So if you were dancing and listening to music, you would be using multiple senses at once in that moment. Maybe you're someone who likes to turn to meditation or prayer. You could write that down. Maybe it really helps you to get out in nature, even if that's just stepping outside into a parking lot and feeling the sun on your face. It can be so helpful putting your feet in grass. Those are options, right? Getting out in nature. Or maybe you are able to do some beautiful, amazing hike that's near your house out in the woods or the mountains. This list is going to be different depending on what you enjoy and what is accessible for you. Unfortunately, a hike in the mountains would not be on my list because I live in Columbus, Ohio, but maybe you live in Boulder, Colorado, and it can be on yours. One of my personal favorites is legs up the wall. So lying on your back on the floor and taking your legs up the wall. You can do a breath work practice. So something like box breathing or 4-7-8 breathing are all pretty popular practices for simple breath work that can be done anywhere. Water is so helpful. Have you ever heard them say that if you have like a baby or a toddler and they're having a hard time, it's like, get them in water? I think this is true even for adults. You could take a shower, you could take a bath, you could literally submerge your hands in a bowl of ice water or run really cold water and put your hands underneath the really cold water. That can be really helpful. Laughing can be incredibly regulating during a triggering nervous system moment. So you could watch something funny or connect with a friend. And then finally, my last suggestion here is physical touch. So you could give yourself a hug. If there's someone nearby who you feel safe and comfortable with, you could ask them for a hug. Physical touch can be really helpful as well. So, movement, meditation, prayer, time in nature, practices like legs up the wall or breath work, water and laughter and physical touch, all of those are great options. And if you have other practices that you love, that you turn to help to regulate your nervous system in a time of deep activation, I would encourage you to write those down. So you've got your user manual. Step one, regulate nervous system. Then, step two, you are going to jot down best practices for moments of perfection. Best practices will be different from person to person, right? I have given you already a lot of practices that you can try. Some of them you might love, some you might not. So you want to put down the ones that are really resonating with you here. I'm going to recap what I've shared with you in parts one and part two that you can jot down here. And of course, if you have other practices that you love, feel free to include them. Reframing, what am I making this mean about me? Being curious with my inner critic, being curious with my inner child, offering myself compassion, connecting with growth mindset by identifying how I can trust myself in any situation, connecting with growth mindset by seeing my opportunities to practice a skill that feels valuable to me. So, those are all the practices that we've talked about so far. You can put any or all of these on your list, and of course, add others that might feel valuable to you here. And that is your really simple user manual, right? You are going to regulate the nervous system, and then you are going to practice one of these things on your list that will help you to navigate future moments of perfectionism. I also really love to remember that on a very basic level, our thoughts lead to our feelings. Our feelings inform the actions that we take. The actions that we take help to create our experiences. Our experiences help to form our beliefs. And then our beliefs are what trigger the repeated thoughts that we have over and over and over again, right? So we've got thoughts to feelings to actions to experiences to beliefs. And then the cycle just continues over and over and over again. Now, of course, there's nuance to this, but for the purposes of a podcast episode, we're just going to keep it really high level there. And that is why your user manual can be so valuable because what we are doing with these best practices for nervous system regulation and also navigating through these moments of perfection is we are starting to disrupt the default thoughts, and then that is going to lead to a different feeling. And that can help to create a different action, which can change our experiences, which can help to inform new beliefs. And like I mentioned in part two, we're always going to default to our subconscious beliefs. Now, I'd love to start to explore who might you be when you move beyond a moment of perfectionism, right? You've got your user manual, you are ready to rock and roll. What happens when you move beyond that moment of perfectionism? Who do you get to be? You might feel really stuck about what that looks like. You might feel unclear about what it looks like. You might feel like, I don't even know what I like or who I am or what I would say. Like, this is all new territory, and that is okay. It is absolutely okay to be feeling a little unclear or a little stuck. This is the moment where we are shifting from what I consider to be phase one, which is shedding. So, shedding of the perfectionism into phase two, which is exploring. And ultimately, we will get to phase three, which is embodying. So, there's shedding, there's exploring, and there's embodying. And this is when we are stepping from the shedding into the exploring. For many people who identify as perfectionists, you may feel like there is no value in doing things that are for yourself. You might feel like there's no value in resting when technically you should be productive, right? You're like, I could be productive now. I should be productive. There's no value in resting. Or there's no value in things that bring me pleasure when I have things that I should do or that I need to do or that I have to do, right? It may feel like there is no value in those things. So, what I want to help you to do today is start to connect with the needs and the desires that are authentic to you when you release the coping mechanism of perfectionism. My favorite way to do this is with the craving trifecta practice. Years ago, I noticed that all of the women that I was working with, no matter what they were sharing me with me about what they wanted, what they needed, what they desired for their lives, for themselves, it all boiled down to these three things: rest, pleasure, and connection. And these themes were coming up over and over and over again: rest, pleasure, connection. It could all be boiled down to those three things. And that is when I came up with this concept, with this terminology, the craving trifecta. I want to support you today to start to explore your own craving trifecta so that you can start to get to know who you are when you release the coping mechanism of perfection. So, for each of the components of the craving trifecta, we are going to ask a couple of questions. We're going to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 how fulfilled you currently feel in this area of your life. We are going to note how and where in your life you are experiencing this, how you're experiencing it. We are going to identify what you are craving or desiring for each of these areas that you're not currently experiencing. And we are going to identify what, if anything, feels like a challenge or a block to getting those needs met. Okay. So let's start with rest. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being unfulfilled and 10 being totally fulfilled, how do you currently feel in your relationship with rest? How fulfilled do you feel when it comes to rest in your life? Now, again, when it comes to rest, how or where in your life do you feel like you get to experience rest? What does rest look like for you in your life? When it comes to rest, what do you feel like you are craving or desiring that you are not currently experiencing? And when it comes to those things that you're craving or desiring, but you're not currently experiencing with rest, what, if anything, feels like a challenge or a block for you to get those needs met? Sometimes it's enough to just ask ourselves, and it's like, wow, that's what I need. I can give that to myself, or I can make that happen. And other times, there are blocks or challenges that we need to identify. Now, let's do that with pleasure. On a scale of 1 to 10, how fulfilled do you currently feel when it comes to pleasure in your life? How or where in your life are you currently experiencing pleasure? What kinds of pleasure are you craving or desiring that you're not currently experiencing? And what, if anything, feels like a challenge or a block to get those needs met? And lastly, let's check in with connection. When it comes to connection, scale of 1 to 10, how fulfilled do you feel in your life? How and where in your life are you currently experiencing connection? What are you craving or desiring in terms of connection in your life that you're not currently experiencing? And what, if anything, feels like a block or challenge to experience those connections that you're craving or desiring? Take your time, explore the craving trifecta, rest, pleasure, and connection. This is, the beginning of the second phase, the exploration, getting to know yourself beyond perfectionism. And I'm so excited to get to continue this with you when we are back together again for part 4.